Hi everyone, my name is Ilin Tolovski and today I'm going to present our joint work on semantic annotation of predictive modeling experiments done together with Panče Panov and Sašo Džeroski. As part of the machine learning research community, a huge part of our work revolves around creating new methods made for ingesting increasingly complex data, which in turn yield increasingly complex models. In order to determine the quality of our methods, we need to test them. And this is usually a very strenuous process which requires a lot of trials and experiments in order to validate our claims. Let's take, for example, one data mining pipeline. Here we show a workflow represented in the CLUS data mining software, which has the training and validation data as input to the system and together with the configuration file. The configuration file contains all the parameters necessary for the training algorithm to be executed, and the output, once the training process is finished, is a log of results and a predictive model. And even for such simple pipelines, if we replicate them in thousands or hundreds of thousands of instances, then we create a lot of artifacts which are very hard to search through and almost impossible to reproduce or to retrieve which pipeline produced the best executing model or the lowest error result, since we don't have any structure inside the experiments. One way in which we can structure the experimental data is by following the fair data governance principles. But what does it mean to be fair? First, the data needs to be findable, meaning that it needs to be uniquely identified on the internet. Accessible means that the data needs to be open. So rather than just being on the internet, this needs to be open for the general public. Interoperable means that the data needs to be stored and structured in formats that are easy to integrate across various frameworks. And reusable means that we provide enough metadata that describe our artifacts in order for other users to easily understand them. So by following the FAIR principles, we created two artifacts, which are in fact our two main contributions in this paper. The first one is the Ontology of Predictive Modeling Experiments, which we called OntoExp. We use this for semantic representation of our predictive modeling experiments. Around this, we built an end-to-end system for remote execution, semantic annotation, storage, and querying of the predictive modeling experiments, which we call Semantic Hub. So back to the data mining workflow that we showed before. This is a CLUS workflow. CLUS is the data mining software that was most oftenly used in our research group, and it contains the following components. It has the training and validation data as input, together with a configuration file, which specifies the parameters for the training algorithm and all the different setups for the system to work. We have the training algorithm, which produces the result logs and the predictive model. So here we can see an example of a cross-validation workflow in CLUS represented in OntoExp. As every cross-validation workflow in OntoExp, we split it in three parts. First is the sampling process for each fold of the data to be generated. Then it's succeeded by the per fold evaluation workflow, which basically use a particular set of folds for training purposes and the rest of them for testing. Here the algorithm used in this process is annotated with all of its parameters, and the per fold evaluation is executed. Once all the per fault training steps are done, one final cross-validation evaluation is done, which basically means that we summarize all of the per fault evaluation measurements and we derive the average metric for the performance. Once we outlined the most important parts of a data mining experiment, we use this annotation schema to integrate it into Semantic Hub, which basically allows us to automate the process of semantic annotation of predictive modeling experiments. And how Semantic Hub works is basically that the user defines the experiment by providing the input data and the configuration file, which is then sent through an HTTP request to our data mining software, in this case CLUS, which provides two artifacts: the experiment output files and the predictive models. The experiment output files are semantically annotated through our Semantic Annotation API, which produces the RDF triples that are sent to our triplet database and stored there. The predictive models, on the other hand, are stored in a separate file storage system as raw files, and they can be furtherly reused usually for predictive tasks or for model retraining. The final functionality of Semantic Hub is the querying interface, which allows users to search the database of experiments on various criteria by selecting them from an interactive menu. And once the criteria is selected, a Sparkle query is generated and sent to the database, and the results are retrieved in RDF triple format. However, they are shown in a tabular format, which is easier to comprehend by the users. Oh, here is an example of how the interface looks, how the querying interface looks. You can see that the users can search through the database on various criteria, and you can see an example of a generated Sparkle query as a result of the selection criteria. The results are shown in a tabular form, and here you can see an example of an experiment with all of its parameters, which user executed it, which model was generated, which parameters were used for the training algorithm, etc. In order to evaluate our system, we follow the FAIR Guiding Principles questionnaire regarding the trustworthiness of our data repository, the findability, accessibility, interoperability, and reusability of our generated data. The trustworthiness aspect we partially follow. We don't follow it in the sense that we don't have the Core Trust Seal certificate, which took 6 months to get, which we couldn't afford time-wise at this point. However, this is a process that we plan to start. And regarding all the other criteria, we follow it very closely, meaning that our data set has persistent identifiers. All of the generated data do so. For each data point, we provide enough descriptive metadata so the other users can understand and reuse the data. We provide additional documentation describing our resources. Everything is publicly accessible, and also we store the data in the OWL format and the RDF format, which by the semantic web community, this is a preferred archival format. We also use standardized vocabulary, as we've seen. OntoExp is our ontology and the standardized vocabulary for creating the annotation schema. The provenance information for the data is detailedly documented, and also according all of the community standards regarding storage and data representation. This is also integrated into our system. And finally, we publish our system under the Creative Commons license. So we cover this aspect as well. To summarize, in this paper, we present a resource, an ontology called OntoExp for semantic representation of predictive modeling experiments. We also integrate this as an annotation schema into our system for running and annotation and storage and querying of predictive modeling experiments. And finally, as a result, we produce rather a fair repository of annotated predictive modeling workflows. With this, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'm open for any questions.